Wow. This is one of my favorite photographers.
Oh, great. I'm glad of that.
I have four of his books.
Yeah, he released so many books.
Actually, back in maybe more than 20 some years ago, I stopped in at Freeman Patterson's house and I just drove a long distance because we both did keynotes at a conference. And I walked in and sat down. He said, here, he handed me this book, A Tree, a Blade of Grass. He said, this will revive you from your 5-hour drive.
Yeah.
So I immediately went home and bought all his books. And yeah, so anyway, sorry about that. But it's really, he's amazing.
A Tree, a Blade of Grass is the classic.
And Hills of Color and so on and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. And he also did a lot of general pictures of towns in Japan as well.
Yeah.
An amazing amount of summer pictures of fields and agriculture and things.
Mm-hmm.
But the Nippon Alps book is fantastic.
I have that one too. Yeah.
And we have Germany to thank. He was incredibly popular in Germany. So a German publisher did really good reproductions of his books. And
his son is also a photographer now as well.
Oh wow.
Yeah, what's his name?
Geez,
the other day.
This escapes me, but yeah,
I've got one of his books. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the name sounded familiar. And then when you guys were talking about that, I was like, oh shit.
Which one's that one?
It's not.
This is Fotografien von Shinzo Maeda.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the compilation one. Yeah.
Okay. His son is
my good friend, an amazing photographer, Jim Basia. He sends me lots of photography books.
Yeah. I can see why he likes them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. He sent me this one.
Mark Davis, who was on my podcast, he lives in Japan, and he sent me this book called Photo Box.
Yeah,
which is all full of Shinzo Maeda photographs.
Oh, is that? I've not seen that one.
Yeah,
I've seen the cover of that one, but
it's like 300 pages of photographs.
Can you give me the ISBN of it if you can? Because I'd like to see that.
I can do that.
Die Japanische Alpens, like the Japanese Alps, I guess.
Nippon Alps, yeah, Japanese Alps, yeah.
That's cool. A lot of the stuff you wouldn't even expect to find in Japan, like the landscapes.
Oh, the great thing, you look at the back of his book, and he shot in 10.8, 5.4, Hasselblad, and he just got a great vision of it's a very Japanese. I mean, you look at Michael Kenner's books, and Michael Kenner, he must have been a fan of Shinzo Maeda because he copied so many of the styles of this.
It's the same turf, right? It's the same place that Michael Kenner. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And what also that Shinzo Maeda was amazing at, you'll see in his books, is the tree forest photography.
Wow.
Absolutely stunning.
I was going to say the other thing is, like, there's a lot of imperfections in his photographs that he actually leverages to make the compositions better.
You could learn a lot from him.
Yeah.
I think it's well worth. I mean, okay, you can take the books and say there's in a modern era, there's quite a few photographs that don't really hold it up, but there's something like in this photograph here. You got these yellow trees at the bottom of the picture that don't really fit in. Does it matter? No. There's a feel to them, and I think that it's that sense of a moment. There's Ruskin, a painter and critic from Britain in the Romantic era, had this idea of a scene viewed at a moment in the corner of your eye. So when you're driving, sometimes you just have this feeling. You glance to one side through the window.
The 35 mile an hour rule where everything looks better.
Exactly, yeah. And it's that sense of when you're
drinking,
you're not analyzing. It's just a vision of something. When you're walking, you might see it. You might walk up to it and can't find it. But there's something there. And
I don't know if you guys follow Harold Heitman.
Yeah, of course. He's actually going to be on the show very soon.
Okay, but when you look at a lot of his photographs, there's a lot of kind of that Japanese minimalism in his work as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, he lives in like a winter.
Yeah.
Kind of perpetual winter landscape, but
if you could own one book of his, a tree, a blade of grass is the one I would highly suggest, and then second to that would be a Hills of Color.
Yeah.
Cool. And I worked with a guide in Japan. I've done 2 photo tours there, and she was saying that it's become so popular now, Kaida, that it's become like Iceland, where there's just hundreds of people flocking there and overwhelming the place. So
because these are all working farms where people go around and take their pictures in Hokkaido.
And then people are getting disrespectful to the locals, and it's starting to cause problems with
fucking bastards.
So you know what happened to Iceland? It's kind of similar.
Yeah.
Photographers don't do that. Come on.
No,
I mean, to be fair, it's like influencers, which I don't consider photographers. They're
they're
subhuman. But there are a lot of workshops being run in.
I was being sarcastic. There's lots of.
I know it's really
there are a lot of shit photographers. That's for sure. But it's more like the influencer style. People that
I had that book 28 years ago, and actually Freeman told me that he was inspired by him. That was one of his.
All right, that's cool. Because this is the mid 80s, early 90s, isn't it? Mostly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's very very old. I mean, not old, but
Yeah, I know what you mean.
There's great work done. It doesn't matter about time. It's just some work is timeless. It doesn't really matter about years.
The fascinating thing about Shinzo Maeda is he didn't really. He was outside of influence in many ways. He wasn't getting a lot of material from America or Europe about photography. He wasn't involved in the circles of what was cool or what was artistic. And Japanese art at the time wasn't like the Romantic period wasn't important in Japan. So it sits very, very alone artistically.
Tim,
really
that's one of the things I love about NLPA is we've been exposed to the work of lots of really interesting Japanese photographers, like like Shoho Shino and
people those guys out there are killing it. I mean, their work is just.
We have got more Japanese entries this year, which is really interesting. There's definitely more.
Yeah, Yuki Kamishima.
Yuki Kamishima.
It's not surprising because Japan has, for me on every level, I come from architecture, but industrial design, graphic design, everything has this minimalist. It's just such a interesting,
super intentional and deliberate. The lifestyle too,
it's a good one. It checks all the boxes for me.
Did you guys watch that series on Hulu, Shogun?
No. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I gotta watch that, dude. I just got Hulu because of that.
Oh my god, it's so good, and every episode gets better and better. But my favorite thing about it, because I'm going to Japan in January, and Japan was never really like a place on my list, but Mark Davis and Shoho, invited me out there, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go hang out with these guys because they're fucking awesome. I got so excited because the culture, like, I just love like the deliberateness of everything that show. Like, I feel like the main thing that show like teaches you is just like the culture of Japan and how everything is like so deliberate and so thought out. And I don't know, that was the coolest takeaway from that show for me. But
here's something really interesting about the Shogun series is the cinematographer decided he wanted to use a lens manufacturer called Hawk, who manufacture lenses who were basically large format lenses from the 1920s, which are the same lenses that were used on Hollywood artists from that era. If you got any see old pictures of the black and white greats, and you look in the corners of the frame, a lot of people will put off by this, but the swirly effects you get on the edges of some large format cameras, and the really weird drop focus where you might have a focus in the center, but the sides are actually focused closer. So you see a lot of this in there in the cinematography as well, but it's fantastic.
It's really good.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's like Japanese Game of Thrones.
Yeah, absolutely. Story is astonishing. Yeah.
And Eric, I think you would appreciate in Tokyo, for example, when you're walking around, every so often in districts, they have digital readouts of decibel noise, and they're very fussy about how much noise there is in the city. And they actually monitor it by a digital readout, like you would temperature. Yeah. So they don't. And you're in a coffee shop. They don't. They don't like people being loud. It's very quiet. And I remember you talking about
just so conscious
and measuring. You were measuring
dream culture right there.
Yeah, I did a study in a place that I love because it is very wild and remote, but planes pass overhead more often than they should because. It's really noisy, it's like about as loud as thunder. So I did a study there. I had to collect data for at least 3 mornings without any kind of interruption, like no lightning storms or anything, which is kind of difficult in the Rocky Mountains. But it was to like establish like the base level noise of there. And so the point of that was like to either keep the air traffic where it is right now, or hopefully like maybe even reduce it a little bit and have flights reroute around the mountain range.
I remember seeing your video clip about that. It was very fascinating.
Yeah, if you've never read One Square Inch of Silence by Gordon Hempton, that's a really good book that I read like while I was making Space Stillest Silence. So yeah, he was somebody that I talked to like while I was writing that book and stuff, and he's a really nice guy.
Eric, I was going to say one thing that I appreciate about your latest book, Space Stillness Silence, is it definitely has that intention behind it, that almost that Japanese aesthetic that feels very intentional, and everything's kind of put into the place in just the right way, and it has that kind of feel to it. So I really appreciate that about your book.
Thanks, man.
Very good.
I'm 2% Japanese, so
2%.
No, I don't know.
I wish I knew what the book looked like.
Oh, you've seen him. You saw it before like anybody else, Mikey.
His bros get the last copies. Come on, man.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, I know. Yep, that's the one.
Well, hey, Richard and Tim haven't even ordered one yet, so it's kind of awkward.
Well,
oh, snap.
They're like, I'll pass on this one.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to pass. I'm worried about not being home because I'm leaving for a long time and I don't want to be delivered and not pick it up, and I don't have anywhere to
sit outside in the rain for a couple of weeks.
I'll send one back with Andrew Malinsky when he comes out here.
I'm just going to pinch Alex nails like I did the last one.
That's a good idea. That's funny because we were talking to him, like, I feel like there's a service that could exist that could make a lot of money where people just like consolidate print book orders for photography books. Like New Zealand, Australia, UK. And you could kill it.
So very quickly, Eric, can one order something from you, a book from you, and say, I want to deliver it in October instead of now?
Yeah, that's fine. Just tell me and I just won't ship it. I do all the fulfillment, so.
Okay, I'll do it tomorrow.
that was embarrassing me.
The only reason
embarrassing me to order.
That's the only reason you invited him to this, Eric.
Yeah, Tim, what's your answer?
I'm still borrowing Alex's before I buy it.
gotta test drive it.
Yeah, you gotta do the research.
Well, we didn't say much about this actual image, but I love like the overlapping here. That's what I really like the most.
That's killer.
Those like bare sections of the lake where the snow is uncovered, the trees overlapping, like all of those sections.
And I feel
really
like
nice
I feel like most people would be super compelled to crop off that bottom little sliver of like those green leaves because
they're orange,
but I think
they add to it.
The Reverend makes them green.
It's probably the teleprompter monitor I'm looking at, but anyway.
They look brown to me, but I like the balance between the two ice parts that are, darker tones. I like that balance between the two. Plus, there's a middle one, a little oval in the middle too. So stepping stones going through the picture space.
Yeah, and there's you can see the wind effects on the snow as well. There, there's a sense of atmosphere in there.
In that classic square format.
Yeah.
I'm glad you shared this guy's work because he's one of those people that probably nobody knows about, and they can find some great used books by him online.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a shame that you don't know if someone doesn't know about him. He's like iconic.
Is it worth talking about how so few modern photographers have any knowledge of like our predecessors? Like,
it's so important to know whose shoulders you stand upon. Like,
William Neal and I discussed this at length in Big Sur, and we're both of the same vintage. And like we get a real chuckle out of photographers talking about photographers in the 1980s that are historic. And we're inspired by photographers from the 40s and the 50s, and who cares what date it was? It's irrelevant. You can listen to music from back then. Anyway, so there's nothing more important than a photographer can do is just study the history of photography and really take a deep dive and research all these iconic, like Aaron Siskin. There's so many. Aaron Siskin is another one that really inspired me back in the 70s.
Apart from a whole list of them. Just showing some respect and checking out the people that kind of established the current photography scene that we're all in right now, the predecessors. You're just gonna have a great time like going down this visual journey and seeing like how mud cracks and leaves and shit, like those aren't new ideas. Like these are things that have been photographed for 50 or more years by people
you mean it's not a fad?
Exactly. I mean, just seeing how like intimate photography was kind of the norm, mainly because of like limitations because of equipment and stuff, like dynamic range and things like that, shooting in soft light and including, less variances of light and things like that. But I mean, you're going to learn a lot by going back a bit and checking out the early stuff.
But if you look at music students, they study like music from centuries before, right? And
painters,
every other art form. So important. And also just a photographer, not just to study historic photographers, but to study paintings. And you can do it informally, but it's going to really change the way you see the world.
I think it's interesting because I feel like photography, especially landscape and nature photography, because of digital, it's become so accessible, and because of YouTube, like learning the basics is not all that difficult in terms of you can get it pretty quickly and pretty easily. And whereas like painting and things like that, most people kind of go to school and they have like a mentor, things like that. And I feel like in our craft, there's been this huge disconnect with the people who have come before us. And the more and more I've thought about this, the more I feel like it's really kind of a shame. Like I feel like there's so much we can gain by studying our predecessors and the shoulders of giants that we stand on, like Eric was saying. So do you guys have any, like, where do you go for this other than books and things like that, or watching Brews and Views? Like, what are your favorite resources to tap into this kind of thing?
Well, you can research the history of photography and just start searching, just make a list. I mean, I did another Chicago presentation where I was always asked about influences. So I did a list of painters that influenced me from back in the 70s, 80s, all the way till now. And then I also included a list of photographers, but more importantly, those painters really established the way I see the world. And I think, and I don't have to be formally, you can just go to library, go to get books, you go to museums, galleries, just take it all in. And it doesn't mean you're copying it, but you're just, all of a sudden you're seeing the world a little bit differently. And I think it's very important. And that's something that's really lacking. I think that the technology I have such an eye roll, and I find that people like to do the backstroke and swim in this frickin' technology, and I don't give a shit about cameras or anything like that. I only care about the art of photography and the vision part. So I try and bring my craft up to meet my vision, and that's how I teach too, right? If people have ideas, I try and help them bring their craft to meet their ideas and vision. So I think too often it's the technical part and they never leave the technical part. So that's my experience of 40 years of teaching. I see that happening.
One of the things I loved doing with On Landscape was I dug into the history of the landscape representation in art. And a while back, I was stuck in a job working at a research and a train company, and I got Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. And it sounds like a highbrow falutin thing, but what it did is it placed philosophers in the context of the times they were in. Nothing happens in a vacuum. A lot of stuff doesn't make any sense if it's talked about outside of its context. And so I decided to try and do the same for landscape and the history of art. So what happened? Where did a landscape start being represented? The Romans decorated the inside their houses with pictures of trees and fruit and landscapes and things. And then I've written about 5 articles. Like the Dutch school of the golden age of landscape in the Dutch schools, and where did it come from? When did people start making art outdoors? Making observations. of art. And that was really interesting for me, looking at the whole history of it, why people painted what they did. We've got another writer for us who wrote about the Impressionist movement and how that how people experienced art. The fact that people moved to the same location to be around other artists because they found it more important to be around each other than the actual location necessarily, and the way they worked. So I loved all that. You can look at pictures on their own and they don't mean too much because they're outside of the context of the age they were created. They might not be impactful in the same way, but you learn a little bit about them and they come to life, I think.
Richard, I love your suggestion of going to galleries and museums. I recently went to the San Diego Fine Art Museum, and it's part of that big complex. They have tons of museums and things like that. And the Museum of Photography, they had a bunch of Brett Weston images printed up and on display, and it was super interesting because I was there with my son and my wife. And
you said Brett Weston?
Yeah, Brett Weston.
Yeah.
Isn't that what I said?
Yes.
Anyway.
Is that Edward Weston's like son or something? Or
yeah.
Well, there's Edward, then Brett and Cole Weston, right?
Yeah. I've heard of Cole Weston. I've never heard of Brett Weston.
Brett's amazing.
Oh man, Brett is my favorite.
Yeah, there's a series of books that Lodima Press, Lodima. They've done a series of about 15 books of Brett Weston's works that are printed in quad tone, and they're just gorgeous. Sorry, Matt, go on.
No. What was interesting about it was that I think there was 5 photographs. They're all black and white, so silver gelatin prints, and it was interesting because I reacted to all of them very differently. This can sound stupid, but I actually found myself kind of critiquing them, oh, this composition, I don't like where this is or that is. But then there was other images where I was
pretentious bastard.
I was like, this is incredible. And so I feel like just by studying kind of the older images, you're going to also find ways to find preferences for your own photography through that process. That's going to help you grow as a photographer. I wasn't trying to be pretentious, Eric.
No, but that's the important thing. Not just looking at work, studying work. Trying to determine what decisions were made in the photograph.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have to say,
why did they do this? Why didn't they do that?
Brett Weston is probably the most underappreciated artist.
Yeah, I never heard of him, and
he's phenomenal, man. I mean, I was so fortunate in Big Sur because we got to spend 3 or 4 hours at Ansel Adams' house, where Ansel Adams' son lives, and we had so much introduction to his darkroom and all his work. But we also spent time at Edward Weston's house, which was just down the street a bit, and his grandson, Kim Weston, lives there now. But we got to see his little darkroom and the contact prints of the green pepper and all that stuff, and the books that were signed by famous artists all over the world. And wow, it was such a beautiful experience. And for me, 40 years ago, I had all these books on my bookshelf, and it was to see the originals and to see where he lived. And they kept his house basically kind of like that, but they also live in it. So it was pretty cool. But Brett was one of my favorite photographers for sand dunes. And if you could ever see his work, he's got some of the best sand dunes I've ever seen, black and white.
There's a book of the Brett Weston's sand dune work, isn't there? It's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. So anyway, it's all nice. But